Hello and welcome back to the studio at Don't Lift Off. So today I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing a true British motor racing legend, Richard Attwood. Richard has been racing since the 1970s. He's 85 years young, still gets out now, both competing and doing demonstrations in some of the classic cars that he raced in. Started racing in the 1960s in a Standard 10, humble beginnings with his family-run car dealership, and then moved on to TR3s, then on to Formula Junior, which was the only single-seater feeder series for Formula One back then, and did very well in that, and then moved on to Formula One. Qualified sixth in a 3-year-old car for the Monaco Grand Prix. Ended up on the podium in 1968, just behind Graham Hill. Got fastest lap in that race as well. Then had a prolific sports car career, racing for Ford in their beautiful F3L. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that car, what it was like to drive. Also raced a GT40, lots of Ferraris with David Piper, and then more famously in a Porsche 908 and 917 at various endurance races, including, most famously, winning the 1970 Le Mans 24-hour race. Could have won in 69 and 71 as well. And he had a comeback with Aston Martin in 1984, and he's a well-known figure in British motorsport and still, as I say, doing demonstrations at Goodwood. It's an audio-only podcast, so I'll be putting some videos and some photos up during the discussion. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Don't forget to please like and subscribe. Don't forget it's free of charge, and that'll help to support and grow the channel. All right, enjoy the conversation. I appreciate you spending your time to have a chat.
That's right. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Yeah.
So what have you been up to today? Have you been out? Did you say playing golf or something?
Played a game of tennis this morning, and really, I'm relaxing a little bit because I was standing a lot yesterday, and standing for me is not very good at someone's funeral wake, and there weren't many chairs around, so I was standing, which is bad for my back. So yeah. I'm not doing a lot today. I've been in the garden recently because we've got a big garden and it's a pain in the rectum at the moment because there's no water around, so we've got to water it as well and do all the weeding, which is very tedious. But anyway, that's another story. So I'm just chilling really at home. Yeah.
It's funny actually. As I was doing the prep for this podcast, a friend of mine, Neil Primrose, sent me a picture of that Jerry Helford had posted of yourself and
who am I? Kent.
David
Piper.
David Piper. That's right. Yeah.
Well,
so you had a meet up last week, did you?
It was at Jerry's behest, because I've worked with him at different manufacturer events just as you have with me, and it was his idea, and he's now in charge of the Kent region, and probably it might be East Sussex, anyway, down in the Kent area. And a lot of the members, he put it to the members, or maybe the chairman of I don't know, but there's a dealer down there whose name is Peter something, I've forgotten it, but anyway, and he thought it'd be a good idea if we had a chat, because David, of course, was a massively successful privateer with Ferraris, and I drove with David in Ferraris as well as Porsche as well, which was later, and I started driving with David in 1964. That's when I started with David.
Right.
And what happened there was that Tony Maggs was his regular co-driver, but he had an accident somewhere in South Africa, and there was a child in a dangerous area, and his car went off the track and actually killed him. And on that note, he just stopped straight away, Tony. And David said, because I'd been teammate with Tony Maggs in Formula 2, and I met him in the junior formulas quite a lot. And David asked Tony, well, if you're going to retire, who the hell do I get now? And because he knew me very well, Tony, he suggested me, and that's how I got the drive with David. So just by word of mouth.
Yeah, right. That makes
and we
sense.
went on and did many races together, quite a lot of success as well. And David was, I think, the most successful private entry as a singleton man than anybody at any time ever. I do really think so. Yeah, he went for a long time from Prix. Well, he started racing he did some early Formula One drives with the Lotus cars, but he did also Formula Junior for a short while. But he started in the 50s and then, went on for years, decades, So
was it all with Ferrari with David Piper?
David was initially was with Lotus 11s probably, something like that, and he had I think he had a junior, and single seater. He was a Lotus man really, and then I don't know when he bought his first Ferrari, but it would have been early 60s, I guess. And but he had GTOs, so I don't know when they came out. He very late 50s or early 60s. David was a Ferrari man, and it went over to Porsche when he tried to get a 512 V12 in securing 68 for the 69 season, and he couldn't get one. I don't know why. David would obviously have to confirm that, but so he went to Porsche and straight away, because he couldn't get a Ferrari, he bought a Porsche, and that's why latterly he was very successful with the 917 as well. So
right.
Yeah. So then, of course, then I don't know, but he's still got some of his cars, from when he bought them. He's got a P2 Ferrari that he bought new, and he's still got his LM, and he's got interesting stuff. But most of his cars that he's got still are Ferraris. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's synonymous with Ferraris. I mean, so he used to bring the stuff to the old Club Fiorano days, didn't he?
He did. That was the behest of probably Peter Gethin, who liked to see the old cars, as we all did. And so David obliged, which David obviously would have been paid for, because otherwise he wouldn't do anything like that. But it was a good side to it as well, because it showing the history of Ferrari really to a lot of the young guys, probably like you. So
that's right. Idea. It's a long time since I've been called a young guy, so no, I appreciate you.
Well, younger than us, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, just starting at the start of where you first got involved in motor racing, and one of the things I just said to you kind of on our pre-call there was that one of the things I don't want to cover ground that other podcasts have already done, but one of the things I thought would be quite nice to do on this podcast is put a link in the description of the other podcasts that you've done, so people can go and have a look of some of the other conversation, because there's some fascinating stuff in there. But so you started your family had garages in the Wolverhampton area, is that right?
Yeah. It was when Wolverhampton was a bustling town and very rich industry all around. We had Goodwood racing tires were based there. There was a very good brewery that's still there, and but it was a big place, a big town. And my father, after the war, he went to most of the British manufacturers and asked if they wanted representation in Wolverhampton, and they all said yes, unbelievably. I mean, he got Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar, Daimler, Aston Martin, Lagonda, Standard Triumph, Vauxhall Bedford, and other stuff, Rover and Land Rover. So he really timing was perfect after the war. He'd built the garage before the war, and the garage was used for the war effort. Funnily enough, through Ruber Owen had a machine shop there all through the war and the war effort. And so the garage was already there. And so they all said yes, because the building looked pretty impressive. And that's where it all started for him, really, although he did a bit before the war, but that's where it really took off. And he couldn't work with his father in Stafford, so he set himself up in Wolverhampton away from his father, and he couldn't work with his father, and I find it very difficult to work with my father as well.
That's
so
amazing.
Maybe that's a family trait rather.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. I
That,
remember you saying that. So
yeah.
he didn't get involved in your. What did he do? Just give you a car and said, "Right, lad, get on your way," or what was the deal?
Well, he was actually, I learned as I went along, he was actually keener for me to do it than even I was, I suppose, in many ways. Because I mean, I wouldn't have done anything without his input, because he did some racing at Brooklands in '35. And, so he was a racer himself as a member of the BRDC. And I suppose the light was still burning in a dim way, and he thought he'd do some racing through me, I suppose. And
He was a BRDC member way before you. So did the BRDC going at a very early age then? Because I assumed it was like from the start of Grand Prix racing, like 1950s. Was it going before then?
Yeah. Oh God, yes. It was started by Earl Howe and other people. I don't remember fully the history of the BRDC, but you can look it up. And I think it started in something. I was really around the Bentley boys, I think, back to the Bentley days. So it would be the very, very late 20s or very early 30s. So that's when it started. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you started off in this standard. Is it a standard 10?
I started a saloon car, standard 10, which was, of course, something we sold, so that was easy for him. I mean, although he paid for what I drove and everything else, he actually personally didn't pay anything because it all came through the garage.
Right.
So he was basically my sponsor, and it was very easy for me to do that, not having to find a car and all the wherewithal to do that. So I only did one or two races with the standard 10. One particularly, the first race I did was at Goodwood in 1959, I think it was. And to prove that I was there is actually a photograph, for no particular reason, of me in my little standard 10. So it proves I was there.
Right.
Then I tried to do another race at Mallory, but they failed scrutinying on the steering wheel was a bit wobbly. So they said, but it's a normal car. This is how standard Triumph made their car, but they didn't accept it. It was a bit bendy. So I didn't race there. And then the following year, my brother, who was a bit older than me, he gave us loaned us up through the garage. They're probably as down as distributor cars, so he probably got some discount on them as well, my father. Anyway, we had a TR3A each in 1960.
Right.
And then I did a whole season with that car. But it was just a basic car out of the showroom. Mm-hmm. So the wheels were a bit strong, because otherwise the spokes would break. And I think I got the latest 2.2 litre engine in the car, with bigger liners. And for me, it was a serious car, because it would do over 100 miles an hour. I thought, blimey hell, that's moving on a bit from a standard 10. But I learned a hell of a lot with that car in 60, and at the end of the year, my best place overall as a scratch racer against other TRs and Austin Healey's, AC Bristols and Morgans was about, my average finishing place was about fourth, because I just didn't I didn't have lightweight panels. And some of them got Weber carburetors and other camshafts and lightened the cars a lot too. So I wanted to modify that TR for the following year to go and be competitive with the other guys. And but my father said, he said, we're not going to bother with that. I'm going to get you a Formula Junior. And I really did not know what a Junior was.
Yeah.
But it was actually the only single-seater Formula next to Formula One. There was no Formula 4. There were no other single-seater racing except juniors. Yeah. So if you wanted to get anywhere, and he must have seen that, so he put me in juniors to see if where my colours were, So So I had 3 years in juniors.
And was that in the UK, or was then it started to become a more European thing? What was the deal?
Well, in 1961, it was all in the UK, not abroad at all. I can't remember if we went to. We might have gone to Ireland, but I'm not sure. And then in '62, we went to Monte Carlo. I remember, but I don't know where else. We might have gone somewhere else as well, because myself and Brill Bradley were the only people who could buy new cars for '62 season, and so we actually, Bill and I, we won quite a few races that year with a much better Cooper than it was the year before.
Right.
And from that we got involved with Eric Broadley and Lola Cars, and we became their representatives in juniors, all through the auspices of the Midland Racing Partnership, which we created out of 5 people with a common interest to drive in juniors in '61. But
Right.
two of them dropped out because they couldn't afford another car. And we had 3 cars in '62, but the 2 mainly, really, I suppose, Bill Bradley and myself. And then in '63 we had Lola Mark 5 Ace. So that's where the Lola bit comes from.
So it was a multi constructor championship then.
Oh God, yes, we were up against Lotus mainly. I mean, if you had a Lotus 18 or 20 or 22 or 27, you usually had the best car on the grid in any particular year, I think, because Colin Chapman was very much into selling a lot of cars, so he wanted to make them attractive, so therefore they had to win, which they did.
Right.
And with Peter Arundel, and before him Trevor Taylor, and probably before him maybe Jim Clark was in juniors. I don't know if Jim was ever in juniors. Yes, he was, wasn't he? I think he was, yeah.
Right.
So
In a Lotus, I'm assuming.
yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. Lotus 18. Yeah.
So who were your
Goodwood,
main
and
competitors in Formula Junior then?
well, anybody who had a Lotus, really, because they were Chapman pretty much was ahead of the game, pretty much all the way through this era now, and in the future years to come. Chapman was a great innovator, and the cars always managed to put the power down very efficiently, and I don't quite know how that worked out, but anyway, he was a great innovator, and every year was a brand new car straight away, whereas we had to wait sometimes for our cars before as the season started. We weren't quite ready, but Chapman was on the button, and he got the team going, and won a lot of races early on in the season. So it became very successful at Lotus. But we were up against Geminis and all the juniors of the day, Elvis, can't think, Coopers, of course.
Yeah. You were in the Coopers, were you?
We were in Coopers for 61 and 62, and then Lola in 63.
And sorry, you did say, yeah.
Yeah, the race that put me on the map was winning the junior race at Monte Carlo in '63 with a Lola.
I think I've got a photo of that. I'm just sat looking at a photo of that, and it looks like the hairpin at Monaco. And so, did you really excel around Monaco? Why did you do well there? Do you think?
I just had an affinity with it, really. It was as soon as I went there, I just found it was just a circuit I liked, hairpin bends and that sort of thing, and the accuracy of it really made it very important. And so to not make a mistake, of course, was one of the main things. But of course, you've got to be fast enough that you've got to take the odd risk here and there. But I've seemed to get away with it every year I went there. So I was a very successful track for me in juniors, and then Formula One went quite well. As depends, of course, what car you've got in any formula, and Formula One in particular. So it was good to me. Monte Carlo, yeah, and I was usually in Formula One. I was parachuted in at the last minute.
Right, were you like a super sub or something? Were you?
Well, I wasn't really. I was trying to get in with BRM, and but it all happened with events that took place. And the first time I was in Formula One was in 1965. with a Reg Parnell Lotus BRM. The BRM engine was supplied by BRM, so it was a better engine than a privately bought engine, I suppose, a V8 1.5 litre, as everybody had a 1.5 litre at 65. And but it was 3 years old, and I probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight, because you're not going to get very far with a 3-year-old Formula One car. And it was a cast off from Jim Clark. I don't know what chassis number, but somebody will know. And but I've finished on the grid. I was in qualifying. I was qualified 6th, which seemed to wake everybody up a bit, and which was but I did have a factory engine, which helped me up the hill and other places too. So, but the car was still 3 years old, and from Monte Carlo onwards, the car was just basically outclassed because it was just old. And I got a couple of championship points, one at Monza and one at Mexico for finishing 6th, but that was just by dint of finishing, not because I was 6th fastest or anything like that. I wasn't. So that was a difficult year, and I had a couple of suspension failures, and I had an accident of my own at Spa, and so I realised that if I carried on like that, I would be probably not long for this world. So I volunteered to refuse to drive the following year, and I then have to wait. Basically, my next move was with BRM, and I got to BRM because Mike Spence, who was driving a Lotus, which I find extraordinary because he was a factory BRM driver, but he got killed in Indianapolis testing a Lotus in qualifying, and that's why I got the drive from BRM, which I knew about only on the Wednesday before the Grand Prix. So I had to pack my bags and get over there as soon as I could.
Wow.
And but the BRM was a 2-valve engine that was actually made for sports cars. It was an endurance engine more than a Grand Prix engine, because the H16 had failed miserably, like the V16 just after the war was exactly the same errors, really. But the H16 idea came from Tony Rudd, and he came from the aircraft industry, and the H16 did work in aeroplanes, but at very low revs, probably at around 1500 revs. But as a Grand Prix engine, it was revving to like 10 or 11,000, and there are so many balance problems with an H16 at those revs that the engine actually was not successful at all. So they gave it up, and they put the V12 in as a stopgap before they managed to develop another engine to replace the H16 that failed again.
Right.
Yeah, so it was a bit of a messy time, and of course the DFV had come in the year before with Lotus, and it won straight out of the bag at Zandvoort. And from then on, to be honest, without a DFV engine, you weren't going to be anywhere, because that was 4-valve, 8 cylinders, absolutely the right package, brilliantly done by Keith Duckworth, and it was just sponsored by Ford through gosh, I can't remember his name. They run the thing at Silverstone, I can't remember his name. I will remember it in a minute. Anyway, it's sponsored by Ford, and the engines cost £7,500, and Keith Duckworth's requirements were to make an engine that had 400 horsepower and weighed no more than 400 pounds. And he managed both, one a little bit above the horsepower and one a little bit low with the weight. So it was the engine to have. It went on 155 Grand Prix.
No, it's amazing, isn't it? It went from 60s right through to 70s, didn't it?
Oh yeah, a fantastic. Of course, it got developed massively, but the first engine was really, really good. It was very torquey. It worked straight away. fantastic. Yeah.
And those
But
years,
I
that was
drove.
that was when
Yeah.
Clark was dominant, I guess, at that point, was it?
Well, he was. He won the first one at Zandvoort, and Graham Hill was his partner, and he won a couple of races, I'm sure, in '67. And in '68, unfortunately, Jim Clark died at a Hockenheim
Mm.
Formula 2 race.
Hmm.
And so Graham carried on single-handedly, leading Lotus, and his teammate became Jackie Oliver.
Hmm.
But in '68 I drove the BRM, and when as soon as I got in '69, when I drove the second car, Team Lotus car, because Jochen and Graham had big accidents with the wings falling off on the rough circuit of Mont-Jewish Park.
Right.
And Hill was injured, but not very much, and Jochen was more injured. So I drove Jochen's space, really. And as soon as I drove that car out of the pits, it was just chalk and cheese between BRM and Lotus. And there's only 1 year difference.
So the
And
photos that I've seen, it looks like it's Monaco, and I think it's of you driving. It looks like there's one shot of it with great big wings on and one
yeah,
without the wings. What was the deal there?
well, because of the accident at the Grand Prix before, which I've mentioned, the FIA or CIA or whatever the name of the people are, got together and realized that wings had got to go because they were, just an appendage so far away from the chassis that there was high risk there. Couldn't really make them strong enough. And so for the first practice session, it was only practice, free practice. Yeah, it was free practice. Qualifying was a couple of days later, or 1 day later. Their decision was taken that when they met in Monte Carlo, by which time the first practice had happened with the wings on, and then they were banned and you didn't see them again.
Right, so
So it
that
was
was at
banned
Monte
at that
Carlo.
meeting. Yeah.
Right, that
Well,
makes
they all
sense.
wanted to go to Monte Carlo anyway and have their champagne and everything else, and life on the boats in the harbour. So all the delegates were there to vote on this, and that's what they voted, which I think is quite sensible. But
Yeah.
that's how I got the drive in '69, and
But before that,
so
you'd finished just behind Graham Hill. You managed to finish at Monaco on the podium, second behind Graham Hill as well. Was that in the BRM then?
yeah, and but I mean, this, several times during that race in '68, I pushed a little bit more because I hadn't done a Grand Prix for quite some time, and I didn't know if I could last the length of 80 laps. I used to be 100,
Really?
and so I had to really pace myself. And then I found after several, got into the rhythm and everything else, so I just pushed a bit more. And as soon as I did push a bit more, Graham just pulled out another gap quite easily, I'm sure, because having driven with the 49, I knew he was winning the race at the slowest possible speed, and that
Yeah.
was my speed, which was probably 2 to 3 seconds slower than his car. So I really, and I pushed right at the end as well, and because I realised near the end of the race I have nothing to lose really,
Mm.
except second place. So I then managed to go faster than Graham, who assumed I would do a time of such and such, but he underestimated a little bit because I got the fastest lap, which really annoyed him. And because they want the triple thing, don't they? They want the pole and the win and the fastest lap. But he didn't
Yeah.
get the fastest lap.
But you got
Yeah,
the fastest
so
lap.
I did, yeah, but only because he didn't push hard enough to get it. Yeah.
Is that towards the
You
end of
see,
the race? Was that because the fuel was getting lighter as well?
well, that's how fastest laps in those days came.
Yeah.
Yes, the tires were, I mean, Jim Clark famously did that. He won 3 Grand Prix in a row, and it might have been 4 on one set of Dunlop tires
No
in
way.
the early '60s. Yes, it did. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's tires weren't an issue like it is today, because the tires would easily last a Grand Prix. So it didn't matter how much you abused your tires, they would still last the race no matter. So, I mean, the modern way of doing it, of course, is totally different. And the faster laps were always when the tyres you'd think were worn out, but they weren't worn out, but they were fully up to temperature, and the fuel was light, so it happened right at the end of the race. Yeah, so there we go.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things, I'm just looking at some of the photos that and some of the articles that I'd seen. You talked about one of your most favorite cars was the Ford something. Is it P68?
F3L.
F3L,
P68, yeah.
yeah.
We call it the F3L, the Ford 3-litre, really, sports car.
That looks a
Designed by
beauty.
well, you know, we like a car that all of us drivers like a car that has an advantage. And that car had the DFE engine for a start off.
Ah, right, yeah.
And the chassis was fairly handy, although it did have some. I remember the launch of that car, and it was a London hotel. I think it might have been the Hilton, but I can't remember exactly. And it was supposed that the tail was quite long, and there was a little bit of a return on the reverse flip on the edge of the back of the tail, and it was supposedly going to develop about 500 pounds of downforce at 150 miles an hour.
Right.
But actually, it didn't quite measure up to that because aerodynamics weren't really known at that time anyway.
Yeah.
And they needed to do a bit more tabs on the back of it. And then it became, I love the handling of the car. The car was, I only drove it twice in races.
Yeah.
One was at, the Nurburgring, which was completely not the race that car should have gone to, really, because it was a streamlined wonder car. And but I think the Germany Ford people want a representation of a car on the grid. So we went, and Alaman took all the cars over there, and I drove with Frank Gardner, and Pedro drove with Chris Irwin in the other car.
Right.
And Frank and I knew the car quite well, and so we were okay with our car. I can't really recall too much about Pedro driving it, but Chris Irwin had a huge accident at the Flugplatz with the second car, and the car was destroyed just about.
Was that because it was aerodynamically unstable? Because that's quite a fast right-hander, isn't it? And it goes over a couple of brows.
Well, the Flugplatz means the flying place.
Flying place, yeah.
And that's exactly what the car did.
Yeah.
And I only just found out, only within the last 12 months, I couldn't find anybody who ever saw it. But I met Willie Tuckett, who raced a bit in period, and he was in a Sprite, and he was just probably being lapped or well overtaken. It's probably it probably was qualifying. I think it was qualifying.
Yeah.
And Chris was driving it rather like, I would think, like a single seater, which you haven't got the same underbody flat bottom under a single seater you have with a prototype car. And I think the car just took off, and it went straight into the bank, and that was the end of that.
Wow.
So, which was a very sad ending, but I think it's because the car's such an expanded flat bottom compared to a single seater. That's the reason
it would take off. So
yeah.
If anyone's listening to this and wants a perspective of where that was, I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, there was a film released called Gran Turismo, and it was about the Gran Turismo competition for the gamers that wanted to go racing, eventually supported by Nissan. And in that film is description of the accident that happened to the guy who won that competition, and it was at Flugplatz where that happened. So if anyone's seen that film, it was at that corner where that accident happened.
Yeah. Well, the Flugplatz was a straight bit of road. You go down a big dip before it, and you go up quite a steep rise. To walk it would be quite difficult, I think. So you're already, your nose is sort of up, and you're on the power as well. And the air just got under the front of the car, and that was the end of that. Just like the ones that took off at Le Mans.
Yeah, that's it. The Mark Webber and Peter Dunbrack, wasn't it? Yeah,
it can happen. But but they're much more sensitive today because they rely on the downforce to do that. And
But you like that car though, did you? That because I see a picture at looks like Old Hall, I think it is. At
yeah,
was that
oh
Lodge?
yes,
That could be Lodge actually. That's Lodge.
yeah, it was. I drove it at the ring, so we didn't finish the race, and I think. Well, actually, on the first lap, I was starting the race, and unfortunately, the brake pads on the front right wheel fell out of the. They hadn't been positioned in properly,
Right.
so the pads fell out and clattered under the car. And unbelievably, I knew what it was. I can't. I've no idea why, but I knew.
You just heard
And
it, did you?
I saw them on
Right.
the back of the car. Yeah,
Bloody hell.
and so I knew what had happened. So I didn't touch the brakes until I got back to the pits,
Right.
because the Ford DFE had such a lot of torque reversal. They could do a lot of braking with the engine.
Ah,
And
right.
anyway, I got back to the pits before without touching the brakes, and they changed the pads, put new ones in, and off we went again. But then I think the electric box failed on the engine. I think probably because of all the rough and tumble of the Nurburgring, which in those days the cars would take off and crash to the ground. It's much smoother now. People call it the green hell, but it's actually they haven't. The people who talk about it now in modern terms don't really know the green hell because there's no catch Armco anywhere around the
Armco,
track.
yeah, it was just banks,
And
yeah. In fact,
if you went off, you had a massive accident, and people had difficulty to find you, I think.
yeah.
But yeah, so that was the one race, and then I raced it at Alton Park that same year, '68,
Hmm.
and it was the TT, and I was on pole position quite easily with that car, and Sid Taylor was second on the grid, and I was a second up on Sid Taylor's car with
Hmm.
Denny Hulme driving, and that car was winning all those sort of races then.
Right.
And anyway, I was started the race. I made a great start, and I was leading after 10 laps by 10 seconds, so it was a second lap. And then the rear suspension started to fall apart because it was held in with a little circlip, and quite cleverly done. But if it was there, fixed in there, it would still have been fine. But they were super glued in afterwards, and then somebody probably hadn't cleared out the super glue, and the circlip wasn't quite in its groove,
Right.
and it came loose, and that was the end of my race because it just started like driving on one wheel,
Y-
So
Yeah.
that was it. And
Well, it
actually,
sounds like it was a
David,
rapid car. I mean, to put it in perspective, I remember you saying Denny Hulme at that time was the reigning Formula One world champion. So to
was
out
he? Yeah,
qualify them by what did you say, like half a second or something?
no, second. Yeah, yeah. The car was
Yeah,
that good.
second.
It was a second. Yeah. So yeah. So and David Piper, funnily enough, with his P3, I think it was. Might have been something else. Anyway, a Ferrari prototype, and he said, "Well, when the Ford breaks down," he said, "Come and help me drive the car." So I did. So I jumped into David's car halfway through when he'd done his bit, and we finished second. But of course, Denny Hulme and Sid Taylor won another race, which they must have won some, whatever the category was for them. They must have won that year as well, I think. Yeah.
Right, right, right.
With a T70 mark, whatever it is, mark. What's the T70? Yeah. Anyway, the latest T70. Yeah. 3B, isn't it? Mark 3B. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So that sounds like something like the start of your sports car career. And so where was the leapfrog up to Porsche? What were you doing in between the Ford thing with the F3L and by the time you got to what was it, the 917? Was that the first car that you raced with Porsche?
No, the 908. Daytona was the first race of the year. and that was in February, I think it was.
Right.
And they ran there because it was a fast circuit. They ran with the 908 Longtails.
Right.
Because the 917 wasn't ready at that stage. And in fact, the 917 didn't come into view until the Geneva Motor Show early in '68. And that's the time the first car was seen by anybody of the public. And it was on a plinth on the side. And it looked huge, which it was. And don't think any of the drivers fancied driving it because it was going to be big, it was going to be fast, and 4.5 litre flat 12. And we could win the races with 908s or the Spiders, 908 Spiders on most circuits, pretty much as it was without the 917. But by then it hadn't been developed. So, but no, before the F3L, I'd driven the first sports car race I did with Bill Bradley, because he was my teammate in Midland Racing Partnership, and it was at the Salzburg Ring in Germany. And I can't remember, but Jochen was also in a 90. It was a 906, and so I think we did quite well, but I can't remember the results. We did have a finish, and I thought these Porsche are pretty good because they stand up quite a lot of maltreatment, if you like, and because it was an airfield circuit, bits of concrete, I think, and so that impressed me, that car, really, because it was just kept going like a sewing machine. And then, but I drove for Ferraris for Ronnie Hall in Maranello concessionaires in 1966 and 7. But the cars were always a development behind the factory cars,
right?
Because they didn't want the privateers or the concessionaires winning races ahead of their factory cars. So we weren't given. If they had a 3-valve, we had a 2-valve. If they had a 4-valve, we might have a 3-valve. And if they had an injection, we are on carburetors. So we were always down on a bit of poke, and they knew that. And I think they treated their concessionaire customers, Ronnie Hall and Écurie Francorchamps and Jean Swatters, and maybe North American Racing Team as well. But I think North American Racing Team did some of their own mods, so they were probably slightly ahead of the game of the English and Belgian concessionaires. But anyway, that's another story. But so it was a lovely drive for Ronnie. He was a fabulous guy, very charming, and I loved to be with him. And we paid good money, the same as the factory money. And but it really was 2 wasted years because the cars weren't fast enough.
Right.
And so at the end, that was the end of '67. The '68, I was driving the F3L. Yeah. Only I didn't do much testing in it, but I only did those 2 races. But I straight away I liked the car. It was a good car, but it never finished. A bit like the GT40s in the first year, they never finished. And then for '69, I could have driven for John Wire the GT40 cars or Porsche. And I thought the future lay with Porsche because they were coming in. I knew they were coming in with determined to win the World Sports Car Championship, which they actually did in 69, 70, and 71, I think. And they were determined to do it. And the 917 came into its own in 1970. In '69, it was still in development. And the drive I had there in '69, I drove with Vic Elford. And years later, I discovered that he'd actually chosen me to drive with him.
Oh, really?
But I just thought it was my turn to drive the 917, because Gerhard Mitter and Udo Schutz had driven at Spa with that car, and in the practice was in the dry, but then the race was in the wet. And Gerhard Mitter started, and he only did a couple of corners, and the engine mysteriously blew up. And I understand why that could happen, because the car was a bit of a monster, and it still hadn't been developed. So
yeah, I heard about that.
Engine failure. Yeah.
So
it enforced by the driver, I think.
So now let me get this right. So in '69, so the 917 had been developed and or had been created, and it was almost like a sort of spaceship. Is that right? I'm sure I read somewhere that it was otherworldly. It was like a completely radical car. Is that the?
Um,
Am I right in thinking that, or is that something else?
no, it actually, if you look at the silhouette of the sideways silhouette of the 908 long tail and the 917 long tail, they look exactly the same.
Right.
And the 908 with the long tail would get very floaty at maximum speed,
Right.
and that was about 195 miles an hour.
Okay.
And we went testing with them at Monza one time. I can't remember why. It must have been before the 1,000-kilometer race one year. I don't know which it was. Must have been, maybe it was 69. I don't know. Must have been 69, I suppose, because we were in 917s in 70-71.
Right.
So, and anyway, Vic was driving around the Ascari bend, which is the one behind the pits, I think, and there were no chicanes in those days. So you were going through there, and I don't think it was flat, but Vic probably, I thought it was flat, and he lost control aerodynamically, and he smashed the car to pieces. But he was completely unharmed. He was so lucky.
Yeah.
So that shows you really. And when I saw the car at the Geneva show, I thought, but that looks like a 908, an enlarged 908.
Yeah.
So and as the speed rises, it goes by the square of the speed or whatever. So every mile an hour makes a huge difference. And I knew that car would be difficult. And it was actually almost impossible, virtually impossible. And just to give you an example of the instability, there's a kink down the straight at Mulsanne, and without chicanes, which it was while we were driving then. And that kink was easy flat in anything. And I don't mean it was difficult flat, it was easy flat in the dry. This car, you could definitely not take flat or anything near the speed of flat, because it just simply was nearly off the ground. And I'll give you another reason. On that particular part of the track, John Wolf's car was co-driven by Digby Martland. And he tried, because he was about to race this car, he thought he'd better find out a bit more about it. So he went a bit faster through that kink than he'd done any lap before. And again, he completely lost control. He spun down the track for about 600 meters. He didn't hit anything. There was a load of smoke and bullets and everything else. Anyway, he drove it back to the pits and he went straight home.
Wow.
That tells you
scared him so much.
Yeah.
So it was speeds in excess of 200 miles an hour, I would think, well in excess of 200 miles an hour at that point.
Yeah, it wasn't. Well, the car would do 235. So we were having to come down. I don't know what speed it was we came down to. It didn't have a speedo. The engineers probably would know, and they'd probably see something that was something wrong, because it should have been flat.
Yeah.
Which of course it wasn't. And the second race the 917 did was at the Nurburgring, and all the factory drivers knew they could win with a 908 Spider.
Right.
So it wasn't like a driver's revolt, but it actually ended up being something like that, because we all wanted to drive a 908.
Right.
And so nobody wanted to buy the 917 because they knew it was big and heavy and cumbersome.
Yeah.
So they got, in the end, they sort of bypassed the problem. They didn't want a driver's revolt where they had no drivers. Not that it got near that. It didn't. Porsche were quite reasonable in that respect. And so they got hold of David Piper, an old stager. Well, by that time, he was just about 10 years older than me, David, and Frank Gardner, another old stage. They got them experienced guys to drive the 917 at the Nurburgring. But it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because it was with the first production type of long tail was used at Le Mans and Spa. But at the Nurburgring, they used a short tail version, which actually made it probably not as bad because it didn't have that great big long tail. But anyway, they said, well, Frank Gardner's comments on that were, he said, if we lose control of this car around this place, they'll need a compass. We need a compass to find our way back to that. and all sorts of funnies that came up. But anyway, they finished, and I think they finished. It's either 7th or 9th in that car. So that's the first time it finished a race.
Right.
And but 908s were 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, probably 5th. I don't know. But anyway, it was a 908 race, and Porsche won it easily, but with the 908 Spider, not the 917. So the 917 really didn't come on stream, although it did right at the end of the year. At Zeltsweg was one of the last races of the season for the World Endurance Championship, and Siffert, I think it was Siffert and Ahrens won, and I was driving with Brian, and we finished 3rd. So that's the first time the 917 won, but it was still a very, very tricky car with a long tail.
But it was. Am I right in saying that year you were leading at Le Mans? Was it by like a massive margin? But you didn't want to be in it because it was very difficult to drive, and you were really. Am I right in saying now? Correct me or tell me what the accuracy of this, but they were piping oil through parts of the chassis in order to save weight. And that was leading to a lot of heat within the car. So it was a really hard car to drive, handling and heat-wise. Is that something like right?
Not really. I think the factory cars did have oil running through the chassis.
Right.
But the John Wire cars, the Gulf cars, ran separate pipe work. But
I see.
That was a year later. That was in 1970. That was.
Right. Okay.
So I still think the oil was going through the chassis tubes on the factory cars, and they may have been on in 1970. I'm not sure. I don't know about that.
Okay.
But no, we were 6 laps in the lead, I think.
6 laps in the lead in the 917.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It was fast.
I was trying to calculate this. So 6 laps in the lead, and it's what, a 10-mile lap roughly, and what, 3.5 minutes? Is it 10 miles?
Yeah, it's about 8 point something, I think.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And so 6 times. So you're nearly 20 minutes in the lead.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, they didn't signal you to back off or.
Exactly right, and it's something that's always wondered really. Well, why we were so far in the lead, why we just back it off a bit.
Yeah.
And but nobody mentioned it. But I wasn't really probably completely au fait as to where we were anyway, because I'd lost a lot of interest in the race.
Because you were just was that because you were so exhausted? What was the deal?
Well,
it was just.
Well. Vic started the race, did two stints. I did the next 2 stints, and after my stint, 2 things had happened to my body, and they had 2 exhaust pipes out the back, and had 2 under each door, and the noise in the car was so horrendous because the exhaust was right under your bum.
Yeah.
And right in the middle of the car. And so I was deaf as a post. I got a blinding headache after my two stints.
Mm-hmm.
I was already with the power leading my head against the rear bulkhead because my neck had gone. And yet the bloody car lasted 21 hours. Yeah. So you can understand how drained and harrowed I was.
Yeah.
After 21 hours. I mean, I was total relief. It was total relief for me.
So also getting this into perspective as well, there was only 2 drivers to do the 24-hour, because nowadays, isn't it like 3 or 4 drivers for the 24 hours?
I think they stipulate 3.
Mm-hmm.
Whether there's a spare driver, because if one of them gets ill, during the race, I believe they have to finish with just the two.
Right.
But I understand it in that the stresses on the body, G-forces are happening the whole time, no matter where you are on track.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst of it, really, in modern times, is that they've now got these two chicanes, whereas we used to just, drive looking at the instruments and whatever instruments were, and really relaxed with the arms straight, with the wheel kind of keep the car straight. And so with a good handling car, like in 970, that was a relaxing time. It sounds ridiculous to be a relaxing time.
Yeah.
220 miles an hour, but it was because you didn't have to do much.
Yeah.
And the kink was easy flat, so it wasn't a drama until it rained in 970. Then it rained a lot, and hugely. So, but before the race in 1970, I was asked actually by the factory in February what type of car or specification I wanted on a 917.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you about this. What led to that smaller engine? What? Yeah.
Well, basically, it was all my decisions because I got exactly what I wanted at that time, and because the 5-litre hadn't been sort of bulletproof before then in February. And so I chose the 4.5, the well-known one.
Right.
And also, the 5-litre would produce more torque. And the year before, the gearbox had broken. And so, therefore, I didn't want to put stresses through the gearbox.
Right.
And wanted a short tail. Didn't want to know about long tail anymore. And I said, I want one other thing. And I said, I want Hans Hermann to drive with me, because he was the steady boy. He's 10 years older than me, and I knew he would do. I wasn't thinking about where Hans Hermann had, finished second the year before to Jackie Hicks in what was supposedly, I think it may have been certainly one of the closest finish. Might have been one of the closest finish ever at that time, because it was only a few seconds, and so that's what I got. And I think. They asked me. I think it was Helmut Bott who rang me, and so that and I think they saw from '69 the pain I was in. I think they saw as disappointment.
Right.
I don't know. I'll never know that. But they specifically asked me what I wanted for the following year in February the following year. Yeah. So. I asked it and I got it. And then before the race, I then see that we're 14th on the grid. And that means to me that 13 other cars are ahead of me and faster than me. And so therefore, I'm deciding that already I've cooked my own goose, because there's no way we're going to get any more speed out of the car.
Yeah, so you'd actually effectively gone for the slower package then, right?
I'd gone for the slow package. It was actually too slow. If everybody finished. Right. But of course, everybody in front, had problems or driver error or whatever. There were 3 512 accidents at the White House because I think I read it was Rainer Wiesel got some oil on his screen and he couldn't see where he was going against, I think it may have been daylight. It would have been daylight, I think. And 2 other Ferraris came up, charging up behind me. One of them was Derek Bell. And they both, in avoidance, lost control of whatever they were doing. 3 Ferrari 512s out in one accident.
Wow.
So that's the sort of thing that happened in that race.
And you said it was quite bad weather at some points as well, then, was it?
Well, it was very bad. It rained a lot. I think a lot of it was at night. I can't remember when it started, when it finished, but it was on for a long time. And I've done races before, and maybe I can't remember if it was in this race, but we got cars with very thin tires were going faster than we were. Because they didn't have to shift so much water.
Yes, they weren't aquaplaning.
They carved through it, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was almost embarrassingly slow but we kept going. And we were having water on the electrics as well. And at any moment, I had imagined that could be that you go through a massive aquaplane puddle somewhere, and it drowns the engine, and that's the end of your race. So we had that to worry about as well. The other two 917s, I think it was a 917, was a long tail, was second to us. I think they actually probably had more water with the long tail. I don't know.
Right.
But, anyway, we had end out the winner. So
you just kept going round and round and round.
Well, yeah, that's all. But we were in the lead after 10 hours, which is ridiculous, but we were. And for me, the difficulty then was to make sure we didn't make a mistake for the next 14 hours.
Yeah.
We're not even halfway.
So you had the pressure of that.
Oh, yes. But the rain was the biggest concern because of the electrics and aquaplane, of course. So, we were just, we did it. And Hans did a wonderful job. And, we came through. But it was everybody else had trouble. Joe Siffert missed a gear. The engine buzzed the engine past the pits, which I saw.
Right.
Lots of things happened. I can't remember all the accidents, but all the cars in front of us, I guess, didn't finish.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a race of attrition. I don't think they've ever had so few cars finishing. So it was bad for a lot of people. A lot of people went off on the rain.
Well, endurance races almost always are, though, aren't they? I mean, it depends, I suppose. Yeah. Modern ones nowadays, they run them like sprint races, but
the equipment's totally different. You've got, I don't know, 2 tons of downforce. That forces the tire into the tarmac, whether you like it or not. And aerodynamics come into it hugely. And of course, there'll be on wet tires with massive grooves, which we didn't have in those days. In 1969, we were in the old Dunlops with the treaded Dunlops that all the Grand Prix drivers were on. We had similar tires, but they were huge, but they were narrow. And on the rear wheels, the width were 12 inches in 69. And then the following year, they went to 19, from 12 to 19. So the tire development in that time was huge.
Right.
Yeah.
So it just gave it loads more grip.
Yeah. But with the wet tires, we had narrower wet tires, and they went to probably, I don't know, 15-inch wheels. Don't know. Maybe 18. I don't know. Can't remember.
Yeah. Big developments in all sorts of areas. So did you stay on for the filming of the Le Mans film? Because I'm trying to correlate to actually when that started. So you just kind of kicked around after the race, then, did you?
Yeah, about 10 days after the race, it was started. They built a village inside of the circuit, somewhere near the Bugatti circuit, in a wooded area, and that's where we reported to every day. And I was on the film a lot. David was on the film nearly every day because he got support cars there as well, which he was paid per day.
Right.
So he had a Lola. I think he took a Lola T70, the green one, as a backdrop to some of the scenes we did. And he took another couple of cars, I think. Joseph had supplied another 917 that he happened to have on load to the thing, and I had to drive it one time, and Joe said to me, "Oh, please, Richard," he said, "be careful of my car," because they were quite delicate cars, really. And he was looking after his investment, but it wasn't used that often. But the film guys, they got cars from everywhere to represent the grid. And it was a big effort, and the budget was $1 million, I think, with Solar Productions. But actually, it went to 7, I think, because it took so long to complete.
Yeah, Neil was saying to me that there was production issues. So there was a lot of waiting around then, in between takes. And how long were you out there for?
Yeah. Oh well. I mean, I was. We did do shift work to come home for a break every now and again, but I was in charge of the camera car, which was race car 20, and we had the cameras on that car, which did a lot of filming against the 512. And there are scenes in the film which I know that I did with Mike Parks in the 512, and I was in the 917, and we did lots of. We rushed into Arnage Corner once, and then came out. Then we went through White House. We did sections of the track, and it was all put together in the film. So there are bits that there were him and me, and a few others, cars involved. And David had his accident in that film, and he was in a 917.
I'd forgotten he'd had the accident in the film.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going through, the beginning half of, coming out of, I think he had the accident. Oh, well, I actually don't know. But he lost control. It was doing we did the White House section, I think. And so Mike Parks was leading. I was second in line, and David was following up as background for the shot. And we did this run 3 or 4 times, and then we did after us the same day, I think. And Mike Parks and I came through, and we're ready to turn around and then go back. And Mike said to me, "Well, where's David?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I never saw." And he'd got off, and he went into the Armco, and just behind the Armco was a little stream, and the posts for the Armco were hammered into the ground, but the ground was very soft because the water was there, and the barrier folded down, and David went over the top, I'm sure, and ended up in a field, and he was still strapped to the main chassis. The front of the car disappeared, gone. So he's exposed. Yeah.
Bloody hell.
And it was a typical French hospital failure with his leg, because he was fine after the accident, and he was flown back to England after a week maybe, and he went to a hospital in near Portland Square. Anyway, he went to hospital in England, and he could smell it. He knew that he was infected.
Oh, so he got infected.
Oh, yeah.
So they hadn't cleaned the wound.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh no!
Yeah.
I just assumed that he just lost it in there and then, and they just had to amputate it, or.
No, I think his leg was probably in one piece. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, maybe his leg was broken. I don't know. I can't remember.
But yeah, they made a mistake then. So it's a fascinating film. It's funny, I've just been watching it this morning, actually, or watching the first half of it. And like you say, the dialogue for the film, there was no dialogue of any of the main actors for the first, I think, 36 minutes, I think I timed it out. It's fascinating.
I was told it was 43 minutes.
Wow.
But I don't know that. I haven't checked it. But it was a long time. You see Steve McQueen driving the 911, which I think went for £1 million not that long ago. Right. And it's weird, really. And they changed script writers certainly more than once. Right. And directors. The director was John Sturgis to start with, who would have been right for the film. But I suppose Steve didn't get on with it. So I don't know, maybe confusion there. So he left, brought another one in. I think there were 3 came. So it was the film eventually was a shambles, really, but it was meant to be the film of all films. And
ultimately, I think if you say 1960s racing, what image comes to mind? You only have to look in the shop window of a Tag shop and you'll see a picture of Steve McQueen, and it's got to be the most iconic film of that generation. You just think racing in the 60s, it's Steve McQueen.
Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah. He was an icon. He'd already done. Well, he did films after that, but I don't know when he made most of his films. Maybe before the Le Mans, I guess, because he was already very famous. He was famous
Bullet.
to
Have you
us,
ever seen Bullet? That's a great film.
He had Bullet. Oh, that racing scene there is fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Best car
fantastic.
chase before Ronin.
Ever.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Ever. Yes.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, brilliantly done, I must say, by both drivers.
Yeah. What was Steve like as a fella? I heard you saying in an interview once that he was quite a introverted fella.
Well, he had, he finished second at Sebring with Peter Revson, in a 908 Porsche, and so he was well in with Porsche, and he's a good driver.
Yeah, it sounds like a handy peddler then.
I mean, he could have made a career of it, I think, and he was very not envious of us. He really looked to us like we were icons, and we knew he was one.
Yes, that's fascinating.
It was mutual admiration, and we went out to dinner with him at least a couple of times, and he was just an ordinary guy, you know. It's a bit like when people want to talk about Jim Clark, and Jim Clark was even more of an ordinary guy, you know. He was so unassuming, and I was traveling through on the Tasman series one year. I was going through part of New Zealand, I think, and Ian Young was in the car, the journalist, and Jim Clark and myself. I can't remember who else was in the car, and we stopped off at this petrol station in the middle of South Island, they might have been, or North, I don't know which one anyway, but anyway, in the middle of nowhere. And I think maybe Ian Young mentioned that that was, to the petrol guy in the office. He said, that's Jim Clark. And he wouldn't believe it. He didn't believe it. He did not believe that it was Jim Clark.
No way.
That's absolutely gospel. Yeah. So,
that's amazing. There's another similar story, just as a random thing. There's a quite funny story of people not being recognised, of Rowan Atkinson in a Land Rover dealership, and he's like, "You look just like that Mr. Bean," you know.
Yes, and he's just said, "Oh, really? Probably." You know, he hasn't admitted it.
Yes,
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, he's amazing too. You know, you sit next to him. I've sat next to him at dinner 2 or 3 times at Goodwood, and he's a very quite a serious guy. You know, and he's totally normal. How he does all these faces and these skits he does, which are absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, the one at the Olympics was really funny. The whole thing with the piano was brilliant.
Yeah, and a lot of them without any dialogue. But he's a fantastic guy.
But the funny thing is, though, Richard, that'll be another person that'll be sat next to you thinking, I'm sat next to Richard Attwood. I'm sat next to a Le Mans winner.
Oh, I don't know about that. There are lots of Le Mans winners.
Yeah, you're too modest. You're way too modest.
3 every year.
Oh dear. Well, so the following year in '71, were you in the Golf Porsche at that point then?
Yes, I got on very well with John Wire, and he when he was in trouble, he often would give me a call and say, I'd like you to drive one of our cars, and this was one at Le Mans. I think they were only going to have 2 golf cars, but then they decided they were going to have 3. That's only my supposition. And so I don't know how long before, but 1971 was my wind down year, because I was going to retire at the end of '71, because I'd had quite a good run and not really injured badly, and it was a dangerous game, and I saw a couple of times upended in single seaters. You give to think about it, and so I thought I had a good run. So I'd always promised my father, who was my sponsor for the first 3 to 4 years, that I would join him in the business. And he asked me to join in the end of '63, but I was just getting started, just turning pro at that time.
Right.
And so he realized he let me go too far, and he accepted that. And I said, but I will come back. I will come back and help you. And so I started that, doing bits of it in '71, but I retired completely at the end of '71. And so it was my wind down here. But John asked me, and Le Mans is a relatively straightforward race for me to do.
Right.
And so he asked me to drive his third car, and I then learned, we had the short tail car, the other two were long tail cars. Long tail cars only finished second in the race ever, I think, in 1970. But all the long tails usually fell out. And so we were in a short tail car, a standard car, with a 5-litre engine, and now the gearbox, actually, as was the year before. In '70, it was a 4-speed box. It was a 5-speed box in '69. It became a 4-speed box in '70, probably because they strengthened it somewhat.
Right.
But we weren't allowed to use first gear at Mulsanne and Arnage in either '70 or '71.
Okay.
Because they wanted to make sure the car was finished.
Right.
But Herbie Muller he was part of the crew. Helping out with Steve McQueen film, and he used to drive like a maniac on the roads, as some drivers tend to want to do. And he going through to the solar village one day, we used to travel in every day like we all did, and but he was always in a tearing rush, probably late, and there was a very sharp right angle corner, and he went off one of these times going to the film to do some filming, not badly, but just crunched his car. And then he arrived with the bent car, and he told them what had happened. And the Americans, the whole crew were pretty much American, and they named that corner the Mueller chicane, not the Muller chicane, the Mueller chicane. Yeah, they all had a sense of humor. But anyway, he was driving with me. Anyone gave him before the race, I sat him down. I said, look, we've got to try and do some good stuff here. And I told him how I wanted him to drive. And I don't know what attitude he might have had, but I made it sure that it was going to be a serious attempt at doing well. And I have to say, he drove beautifully, exactly as I'm sure there were similar times we were doing in a very grooved way, not difficult, and. He did a wonderful job, and we lost the race only by 5 minutes. But during the race, we had a gearbox problem where it jammed in a gear.
Right.
I think I was driving it when it jammed in a gear. So I came in, and they took 45 minutes to repair the gearbox, put it all back together again, because you couldn't just change the gearbox. You had to change internals.
Right.
And I mean, Audi in some years used to change the whole of the rear back of the car, didn't they? Which is the engine, the gearbox, and everything.
Yeah, just rip the whole thing off.
Some of them, well, they did, yeah.
Yeah.
So they made it unboltable. But you couldn't do it then, and you certainly can't do that now. And so it took 45 minutes, and then the winning car came in, car number 22, the anyway, Martini car, driven by Van Lennep and Marco. They came in with exactly the same problem, but an hour or so later, and it took them only, because now they've got buckets of cold water and chucked everything in there, so
right,
because the gears would be red hot.
Right.
And they changed their car in about 20 minutes.
Right. So you lost 15 minutes on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we lost a bit more than that.
Yeah. Right.
So could have been one and another one again. But
69 and 71 was the ones that got away then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, and actually, Andrew Frankel is doing for Motorsport magazine an article that I did an interview with him about a few weeks ago. Anyway, which is coming up if it isn't already. I don't know that. But about my 3 years at Le Mans with an IM7.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, when that comes out, I'll stick a link to that. The thing that
Yeah.
I was going to just ask you about was about. So when we did, I was lucky enough to obviously work with you at Club Fiorano in late 1990s, and with Peter Gethin, and it's interesting. There's a picture on screen here of Jochen Mass, actually, the sadly recently departed Jochen Mass.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were very lucky to get from you was you giving us a guided tour around the old Spa, which I've then passed on to anyone that I've ever been to Spa with. So what was it like to race like the old Spa and the old Osterreichring and whatever else was like usually about 5 times as long as it currently is?
Well, they were all road circuits, really. And, on the roads you get telegraph poles and buildings and bridges and drops and ditches and trees, anything really. So when I took you around there, because up to Les Combes, the circuit is pretty much as it was, although they've changed Eau Rouge many times, haven't they, to try and make it, I don't know, safer, I suppose, but it's still a hugely fast corner. They still have hugely fast accidents. But it was when that corner became flat in the Formula One car, which Senna did possibly first. I don't know if he did or not. But once that became flat, then the corner becomes less significant, doesn't it? And I think that spoiled a lot of what Spa was all about. But the old Spa, where you come up to Les Combes, where it's a sort of quick right and a right, left, and
right,
right,
left, right, Les Combes,
the circuit went over the brow of that hill there.
Yeah, left and then down. That was where our first time I went there was where our hotel was, down the sort of downhill stretch, if you remember. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, that downhill stretch led to Bournonville, which was 180 degree corner, but taken at probably 120 or 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
In single seaters without wings and everything else. And then you went past a section of which was the kink.
The Master Kink.
Well, no, there was a kink before then. Coming out of Bournonville, there was a slight left and right past some flags that were always there. There's now a road. It's a road junction now.
Right. Yeah.
That's where I showed you the rest of the circuit down to Savalo.
Yeah.
Which had a slightly angled tarmac bend to help you, a 90-degree bend to help you around the corner. So it's a bit like the carousel, but this was angled to the right, not
yeah.
And then you went up, flat out there. From there till you get to La Source.
Yeah,
it was flat out. I think it was flat out. Yeah.
All the way up, and it was essentially public roads as well, right?
Oh yeah. And you're on full throttle a hell of a lot of the lap.
That kink, was that more difficult? Because if I'm right in thinking, so I used to play a game called Grand Prix Legends, an old computer simulation game, and it used to have that section on there, and the exit of it didn't it exit up next to some buildings? Wasn't it just like the buildings left hand, right hand side of the road?
Yes, there were. Yeah, and that's why the road had a kink. Yeah, it was to miss the houses. Yeah. But it wasn't intended probably to be a circuit. I don't know that.
I couldn't imagine how fast that would have been. So what would you have raced there? So you'd have raced the single seaters back then?
Well, I think I would imagine that kink was flat in the dry. I would imagine it was flat.
Right.
At 1.5 litre car be, I don't know, 165, 70, I don't know. And then the 3 litre cars would be a lot more than that. So downhill as well. So it's probably approaching 200, I guess.
Wow.
So you might have to back off, I think, for that one. Yeah, I think so. But
wow.
I can't remember. but there were the two circuits that when I left them, having raced and got through them, I used to clasp my hands together and thank someone for sparing me, because those circuits were so dangerous. The Ring and Spa were, many people over the years have died. And, you just never know, do you? And but you don't go around the circuit thinking of that. You just get on with the job. But what was the other track you mentioned?
Osterreichring. Did you race on the old Osterreichring?
Yes, I did. I raced with Pedro, which was the last race he won.
Pedro, we haven't mentioned his surname, Pedro Rodriguez.
Pedro Rodriguez, yes. Who I knew, I'd been with him. He was my teammate with BRM in '68.
Okay.
So I knew Pedro quite well socially, because we, at all the meetings we used to meet up. And so again, John Wah called me at the last minute, because his regular co-driver, I still don't know what happened, because Pedro would have had a co-driver all that year in '71, but I don't know who that was. Anyway, I was called at the last minute, and but the Osterreichring had a most amazing corner. As you go past the pits from the right-hander that leads onto the straight, you went flat out past the pits, past start-finish line, up a hill, an upper brow, and a hugely fast right-hand curve, which to the right, which was for Pedro flat.
Right.
And I couldn't do that flat because I hadn't been driving most of the year.
Right.
And this was Pedro's car, which he'd fine-tuned and set it up perfectly.
It's like an old pair of slippers for him.
Yes. Yeah. And I asked him, I said, how the hell did you do that flat? He said, and he just showed me with his hand, with his foot on the accelerator, and he just leaves it down there.
Wow.
I couldn't do that flat.
Yeah.
And Pedro did all the qualifying except the last, probably 20 minutes, something like that. And I was given my chance to go in the car. And I'd done this at the Nurburgring when I was driving with Jackie Hicks in '67 in the Mirage.
Right.
And so I was given, I think, probably 4 laps, which, for a co-driver who's going to be doing part of the race, no matter how long that is, I think I don't quite understand his judgment there, judgment, because you've got to give the bloke a fair chance, because otherwise he's going to get in nervous as a kitten, for the race. So I do my 4 laps, and I get the inboard, and I do another lap, because I'm not happy. And I was 4 seconds a lap slower than Pedro. It's quite a long lap there. And so the next lap, I got it. I was just on the last lap I did, which I shouldn't have done, but I did, was 2.5 seconds behind Pedro. So the times were still coming down, but that was it. I think it was the end of qualifying anyway. So, but at least I knew I was somewhere there.
You were somewhere there about something that was respectable. Then.
Yeah. And I did exactly the same at the Nurburgring. And again, the tactics by John Wah was to put Jackie in the Mirage, which was a GT40, modified GT40, which was a faster car, but still heavy as lead going on the Nurburgring. And I did exactly the same with John Wah there, because I was given, similarly, right at the end of qualifying, I was given, I think it was 4 laps to do again. This was obviously the way he did every co-driver, I guess. And so I do an extra lap. And this is John Wah, who is, death ray is, hugely frightening, can be.
Yeah.
And so I do another lap. Of course, that's a long lap then, because I've got to wait 9 minutes before I start coming back again. I'd gone off the track. If I'd crashed in either, I would never have driven for him again. But I didn't crash. And I knew my time, that last lap of the ring, I knew it was quite close. And but I didn't see the time. and I was too embarrassed, to be honest. I got out of the car, and I thought,
That's so British.
I'm going to get such a bollocking. And I'm sure I kept my helmet on in self-defense. and I think I've just walked behind John to walk to the pits, and just as I'm going just past him, he says, "Attwood," he says, "Yes, John," and I'm just about to explain why. He says, "Oh, that's all right." And I was expecting a huge amount of, outpouring of rage from him.
Yeah.
But he knew why I'd done the extra lap.
Well, you'd got his respect at that point. You were just standing your ground, and I'm guessing you did a good lap time.
Yes. Well, I thought but I didn't see it because I was too embarrassed. And so years later, John Horsman writes to me, and he asks about some guy who's in a pre-war car at extreme angles. I don't even know what the car is, and it was a PLD Attwood. And he said, I asked me if there's any, relation. I said, no, I have no relations who did that sort of thing. And and I said, but John, I think it was all by letter, I think. I said, but I always wanted to know what my lap time was on the qualifying for the 1,000-kilometer race in 1967. And he said, because he had a brain, he recorded everything. And he said, I can't tell you that because I wasn't there. And I thought, oh my God, I waited all these years.
No.
And I'm still not going to get the answer.
Yeah.
And he said, but I was there for the race. And he said, I can tell you, you were 0.8 of a second behind Dix during the race.
Right.
On a lap. So it's fastest lap, my fastest lap. Yeah. So,
yeah.
And Dix won 2 Grand Prix there.
Yeah. So you were on the money. On the money.
I was on that day.
Yeah. And you made
I tell you what, it was actually controlled rage.
Right.
But it was controlled. And you're up for it, so you get on with it.
Well, that's the discipline of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I always thought driving is a controlled rage. I remember, even from the early karting days, it was always like, you'd see the photos of a helmet and you could see looking angry.
Yeah, wide eyes.
Yeah. But you made a comeback in '84 at Le Mans. How did that all come about? When did
oh gosh.
But you were retired for 12 years from international driving then?
Yes, it was a one-off. I think it was always going to be a one-off, and was like Nimrod type cars, Astons, and they were run by who's the big Aston man who's died actually? But anyway, I'll think in a minute. Richard R.S. Williams, isn't it?
Right.
R.S. Williams, Richard Williams. He's the Aston man. And he was running the cars in the team, and he had a guy who was looking after our car, the second car, and he was looking after the Ray Mallock and Drake Olsen car, which was the lead fast car. And I was driving. Mike Salmon had got me the drive really, because I tested a car at Silverstone before Le Mans, and Mike said how I would drive the car on one particular aspect of my driving. And so Richard Williams was taking a lot of note of this. And when I got to drive out of the pits, I didn't sort of roar off down the pit lane. I just went out gently, and as you would with endurance racing, we've only got you got speed limits as well anyway, but gently, with not disrupting the car too much and all that sort of thing. And from that, Richard Williams knew what Mike Sam was talking about, so that's why I got the drive, and I got paid for that, which I should do. And anyway, it was a disastrous race. Anyway, Mike Sam got me the drive, and John Sheldon was the third driver, so 3 drivers. And Ray Mallock was hugely fast in the Aston for qualifying, and it was to impress the sponsors, really, part of which was Aston themselves, with Viscount Down, was it? I think it was, who was a big Aston fan. And anyway, we were the finishing car, basically. And so Mike Salmon did the first double stint, and then I did a double stint. And during my stint, we now had, I think we had the longer tail car for Le Mans. And I liked that car more than the short tail car, because we had a run through at the Silverstone sports car race before Le Mans in those days. I don't know what it was called, actually. Like it might have been a World Endurance Championship race in their day. And so we drove, I drove one there, and that was in short tail. And I didn't like it quite so much because it was grippy. But then actually I did have a slide at one stage, and that was all right. But I was underdriving it rather than overdriving it. So I hadn't got used to the downforce. But at Le Mans, with long tail car, it was acted for me more like a normal car because it didn't have the same downforce. It was more slippery, so it was faster. And I got used to the car. I got into a rhythm certainly during my second stint, probably in my first stint too. And they tried to slow me down, but I wasn't taking it. I knew I wasn't taking it out of the car. And I still went faster. They tried to slow me down 2 or 3 times, and I just kept going faster because it was coming to me. You know, I was in the groove and then the rhythm again after so long, and I really enjoyed it. And so I came in, and then John Sheldon got in. So Mike and I went back to the motorhome, and we had a chat about what it was like. And I said, "Oh, I think it's great," and he was great, feeling good about it. And then after about, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe something like that, and then the circuit went quiet. And I said, "Why is it quiet?" You know, and that's when John Shelton had gone off. I think it was somewhere near the kink, and had crashed or had a puncture or something. Nobody really knows. And then the other car drove into all the bits and pieces of the wreckage. So they're both Astons out at the same time in the 4th hour. Yeah.
Just wiped everyone out.
Yeah.
Wiped each other
out. The
out.
whole thing was finished.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, sad story.
Yeah. And then, well, I'm conscious now, Richard. We've been on the phone for nearly an hour and 50 minutes. It's like a double stint that you've done here. So thanks for giving us your time. There was a couple more things, if you don't mind me asking. There's a couple more things I wanted to ask you. There was another podcast that you covered off that you talked about learning the Targa Florio. What was that like to do that? That sounds quite a task to do. Is it something like 45 miles for a lap?
Yeah. I thought the Nurburgring was difficult to learn, but the Targa was something else. But it was the type of corners I actually like, but there were minimal amount of width to the roads. Anyway, at the beginning of the year, we all went to the Porsche factory in '69 to discuss the program for the year, and then the Targa Florio specifically came up as being one of the events, and I stood up and I said, but you know, I haven't done the Targa. You know, maybe you want to find another driver to take my place for the Targa, because I've never been. And they said, Herr Attwood, you will do the Targa Florio. So I sat down again, knowing what my program was going to be. And so, in fairness, they sent both Brian Redman and myself down in 2 911Rs, which were quite special cars, actually. They were 911 race cars, really geared geared for a maximum speed of only about 105, 110. They were like hill climb cars, 105, 110 miles an hour. And so we drove down from Stuttgart, each one with a car. And we drove all the way there. It took a whole day. We got the ferry from Napoli to Palermo. And we arrived off the boat early in the morning. And we tried to find where the circuit started, because we had no instructions as to where it was. And we came across a tiny sign. It wasn't a road sign. And we went up this road, and we happened to be appear at the pits. And we said, my God, we found it. This is the starting point.
We're here now.
Yeah.
So there's no directions or anything like that then around, no sort of arrows or anything.
But we weren't given the instructions from anybody from Porsche either.
Right.
You know, we had no plans. And anyway, we were given a set of brake pads if we needed them, which we didn't, and a can of oil, which we didn't use either. The can of which I still got here, and so we got there. So we thought, well, we're here. We might as well do a lap before breakfast. So this lap took 2 hours, because there are certain junctions. So the Targa Florio could go one way or the other. We didn't know. So we had to wait for a local to come along and ask for the Targa Florio, the Corsa Targa Florio. And they said, oh, it's that way, to put it in Italian or Spanish or whatever they speak, Italian. And so that's how we did the first lap. And we ended up getting back to pits, having stopped 3 times to ask the way. And the only fast bit was along the seafront. And they had some hugely fast corners there, which are never really talked about. And then after the 3-mile straight with kinks in it, we turned left up towards the pits. And we've been following each other-ish type of thing. And Brian and me, I can't remember who led. And we get back to the pits, and we get out the car, we lie on the floor because the sun's out. We're crying with laughter. There's absolutely no way we're going to learn this lot. And so it was a day to get there. We gave them 10 days, day to get there, day to get back. 8 days to learn the track. So we did, I think, about another 2 to 3 laps, maybe only, that day.
In one continuous go, each lap?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we had a debrief at the hotel that night over dinner. And we both said, we're driving round, but we really don't know where we are. We're not taking much in. And so we decided we had to do it in sections. So we settled on 2 miles. 2 miles up going from the start line up for 2 miles, really concentrating on where the track goes, and then turning around, switching our brain off, as it were, and coming back and going back and forth, back and back and forth. So after so long, you've learned that bit.
Yes.
Then you do another two miles.
Yes.
And we probably did that lot in a day.
Wow.
So we got 4 miles in a day.
Wow.
And then we have another debrief at the hotel, and we realize we're not going to finish the track in the time.
Yeah.
We're not going to do it. So in the end, we settle on thirds.
Right.
And that's how we learned it. And Brian was fairly convinced he didn't know it, but he was a rally driver, and he probably could adapt better than me, because I never did I did one rally with the Jaguar Apprentices Motor Club.
Right.
And we got lost and we were hopeless, so I got the wrong co-driver. So I never did another rally after that, which is not surprising. And so that's how we learned it. We did it, and then the last day, I think I convinced myself that I knew every corner, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And I did.
Wow, did you? Was it a pattern
Yes,
in your mind at that point?
it was just that you pick out certain points from memory, and
Yes.
you know what the next bit is, and somehow, yeah, you piece it together,
It pieced it all
and
together. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I did.
Yeah. So,
Except probably with one exception of the really fast corners on the seafront stretch, because they were seriously fast corners, well over 100 miles an hour.
really?
And oh yeah, and rocks and God knows what if you came off. You know, there's no mercy there, save for you. And but when I got back for the race, which is now in May, and I'm driving a Muletto, like a 908 that's just for practicing it, if you like. And I I I do the first tour in this car, and of course we've got to get on with it because we're going to be racing soon, and you won't have that much opportunity to practice. And so I get to, after about the fourth mile, there's a bend that goes left, some S bends, if you like, but they're quite tight and they're quite quick, and the road's narrow. And you go through a left, right, another left, right, and the final left, right is a corner that you can go faster through because it's coming out of those.
It's opening up.
Straight. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the first time I go around, I've actually lost my thoughts in whether it's concentration, I don't know. But in the blur of speed, I think in the middle of the two left rights that's the last one, and I so nearly go off, and I'm teetering with the brakes softly on, trying to slow down. And my heart goes into my mouth because I know I've made a huge error. I could have smashed the whole car up.
Wow.
And I certainly remember that bend after
You
that.
gathered it
So
all together.
I got it right every time.
That was amazing.
Yes, but actually I did learn it, and I did quite well in the race, I think. But then, unbelievably, in the race, I'm on my last stint, my last lap. There was 11 laps. I think it was 11 laps. So you had a 3, a 3, a 3, and a 2. And I'm doing my second tour. Oh no, did I start? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, I've got one more lap to do, and I go off. And I don't go off drive off, but I've actually gone up to the edge of the road. And the edge of the road on this exit of this one easy corner is the grass has grown over a gully and covered the gully, and the grass is at the end of the road as far as I'm concerned. But I just lead the car out gently rather than hang the car, hang onto the wheel and pull it over for smoothness. And Jackie Stewart made exactly the same type of error at the Nurburgring. And I let the car go out to the edge of the grass. And there's a bloody gully there that you'd never see. And so that's the end of our race. I mean, the suspensions are smashed to pieces down this gully.
Really?
And so that we didn't finish that. Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put on the end of this video a video that I found, and it's from Goodwood Festival of Speed of you driving the 917. Is it the K, the number 23 car?
Oh,
and
yeah.
It looks like it's 2020. I'm not sure. You might be able to correct me in which year it was, but it was, the video was posted in 2020. And at 80 years old, either 79 or 80 years old, you are fully lit up the, up the hill.
Yeah, but I know the hill very well. I know the car quite well.
It's I know you're being exceptionally modest, and I'll challenge you on this, because if I'm doing what you did in 2020 in a racing car, then I'll be a happy man. Because when I play this, and people that are watching this on the video get up to 40 seconds, and you'll see how on edge the car was coming up to Flint Wall. And it's like, that was good. That was lit. And if I'm as lit as you when I'm 80 years old, fair play to you, Richard. Fair play.
I interviewed on that clip. Have you before I went up or after I came back? Was I interviewed?
I don't know.
Was that part of the clip? Because that was Gordon Robertson, if it was, and that was I think that was some years ago, beyond 2020.
Oh, it could have been,
but I'm not sure. If there's an interview before or after, then I know that when that was, and I don't know which 917 that was in. I don't think, but anyway, yes, they had a camera on it. There was a camera on the car.
No, well, on this particular clip, it wasn't, but it was just like, it was so impressive
from the outside then.
Yeah, it was from the outside, and it was so impressive. Like, I've even showed it to my wife. Now, my wife's not into motor racing. I was like, take a look at this. And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. It's like, it's fully lit, like properly working at the wheel. It's like, it's impressive because I've seen people do demonstrations, years after they finish racing. And I was like, he's still giving it the beans at 80 something years old.
Well, I haven't seen that. I don't think I've seen it. No.
I'll share it with you. It's great. It's absolutely magic. Yeah. Well, listen, Richard, thank you so much for giving me your time. It's been a great conversation, and I really appreciate.
All right. Okay.
That's fantastic. All right, Richard, you're a living legend. I know you won't take that. You're the most modest man that I think I've probably met in motor racing, but you are a living legend, and thank you so much for your time.
Fading in my ears.
I don't think so. I think I've got evidence to the latter. Anyway, Richard, thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Okay.
Cheers.
Okay.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.